Director and Women's Rights Action Coalition. And I do invite you to check out our website at lwvsaratoga.org for a lot of information and to see what's coming up next. But we do thank you for joining us tonight, both here and in person and on the webinar. And just a note for everybody that this is being recorded. And if you are on the webinar, please put your questions in the Q&A. I do want to thank Skidmore College for this lovely space. To their IT team, are they here? We can acknowledge them, that without them, we would not be live. And also to Professor Sylvia Carley, who arranged for us to be here in this space, which was lovely. The focus of our April forums has been environmental for the last several years. And this year I had the idea of inviting a speaker from Beyond Plastics. After hearing Judith Enck, the founder of Beyond Plastics, speak on the roundtable on WAMC. If any of you listen on Fridays, you'll probably hear her. I had heard a doctor at a conference a few months before that saying that no woman of reproductive age should be drinking out of plastic. And then I heard Judith talk about microplastics, and I thought I knew about, you know, not microwaving in plastic and not storing things in plastic, but she put a whole new perspective on it for me, about how much we are exposed to microplastics and how they reside in us. So I reached out to them and was lucky enough to find Kim Cameron, Dr. Kim Cameron. She's coming to us today from Tully, New York, a little bit of northwest of Syracuse. Northwest Syracuse. She is a PhD in plant physiology and was a research scientist for Cornell University and SUNY ESF. 13 years ago, after teaching biology at SUNY Cortland, she started a tutoring business focused on helping high school and college kids with math and science courses, which I should have had. She has trained with Judith Enck at Beyond Plastics and has become an outspoken advocate and a volunteer speaker for the organization. And near and dear to all of our hearts, she's also co-president of the Women's League of Women Voters of Portland County. So a special welcome to Dr. Kim Cameron.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm so excited to be here. It is one of my dreams to combine my two loves, my interest in plastic and my love of the League of Women Voters, and bring them together. So when I heard about this opportunity, I absolutely jumped on it. So yes, I'm a volunteer speaker. Beyond Plastics does what they call a speakers bureau. And I've been on the speakers bureau there for a couple of years now. I'm a research scientist, and so when I started learning about plastic, I was trying to figure out how we recycle the stupid stuff. And I got really frustrated. That led me to go and do some searching on the internet. I found Judith Enck Beyond Plastic, and I went, I'm going to take their course. And of course, that was the beginning of kind of the end in some ways. And since then, I've taken a number of courses with them. I've also, as I said, been on the speaker bureau, and I give talks pretty well all over the country. Most of them on Zoom. So I'm super excited when I get an opportunity to give a talk in person. So with that, the title is plastic pollution, and by the end you may not, you definitely don't want to drink out of one of those plastic bottles. So besides the fact that I'm putting my two loves together, the other issue for me are these guys. They're a little bit older now, but I do this crazy stuff for my grandchildren. And yes, I do wander around an event that we have in our community as a plastic lady. And I'll do crazy things, but it's really our grandchildren that we need to think about. It's not us. some of you are younger, but maybe for you all, but us, me, my age, probably not going to affect us that much, okay? But it is the next generation and the generation after that's going to have some problems. And I start off by saying, you know, our world that I grew up in is really different from the world that we have now. When I was young, and you can see I was born in the 50s, when I was young, there was no plastic. But now, when my grandchildren were born, just a couple of years ago, there's a lot of plastic. And so we look at this as plastic, right? This is what we see as plastic. But this is only part of the problem. This bottle itself really isn't the problem. The problem is when this stuff breaks down. And there's a lack of how long it takes for this stuff to break down. So back there in the 50s, when we started producing plastic, there's about a 40-year lag when it starts to break down. So not only are we now seeing it break down, but we're increasing the amount that we've been using for the last 40 years. That's our problem. And there's nothing else you can avoid it. Plastic is a hazardous substance. It is full of chemicals, and those chemicals leach out into our environment. And it also breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces, and those smaller and smaller pieces end up in our environment and eventually in all the organisms on Earth. And I'll smile a lot through this, okay? When we think of plastic, we kind of think of this, right? It's the picture everybody has of the plastic in the ocean. It's really messy. You know, you may have seen the blurb by 2025. That's this year. Okay. For every 3 pounds of fish, there would be 1 pound of plastic in the ocean. It's just been going in for a long time now. For a very, very long time. And that's kind of what we think about when we think of plastic. And there is a remarkable thing though here. Plastic is packaging. Something that's used once and thrown away. So maybe there are some ways that we can reduce the amount of plastic that we have in the environment. But the reality is, this isn't where we see plastic here, right here. We see plastic in our grocery store. That's like, it's nice, neat little rows of plastic. It's not that messy stuff. Well, I live in an area where I take stuff to a landfill. So I actually do see the really messy stuff, but most people don't, right? Most people just see that nice little rows of plastic, no big deal. We just got all this plastic, right? But unfortunately, it's not exactly how it works. Because we have to get rid of that plastic. And where does it go? Well, you know, we saw the picture of the ocean. Like a lot of it goes to the ocean, right? We think all of this plastic is going to the ocean, but that's kinetic. The plastic is not very little that actually goes in there. Mostly it's going in landfills. Is in land. It's on massive amounts of it. And while we're here, let's look at where the plastic is coming from. A little bit of recycled, and a little bit of residual plastic, not much. The vast majority of it is new. So the idea that we're recycling it and we're reusing it, if we're lucky, we might be recycling 5% of our plastic. And that's being kind of generous. So most of our plastic, the vast majority of it is actually new plastic, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So, the truth of the matter is, we look at this, see it, this little bottle is now breaking down, it's in our landfills, it's producing smaller and smaller pieces. And we got a lot of it. That's a picture of the United States. Those are landfills. Remember, 42% of this plastic is just for packaging. Okay? And it's going into those landfills. And you can see the open ones are in red and the closed ones are in green. And the size of that circle is, it shows you how large a landfill is. And we have a lot. They're all over the place. And one here, so you just gotta bear with me, because you have to think about where that plastic is, and it's not also in our farming. So if you go out to farms and you look around, you see all the plastic, the hay is all wrapped in plastic. Well, I talked to farmers about that, and what do you do with that plastic? There's nothing we can do with the plastic. Why not? Well, the plastic's dirty. We did try to clean it and reuse it, but we can't because it's dirty, so it just goes to the landfill. Exactly. But there's so much plastic in farming. And I'm just giving you some pictures, you know, we have plastic mulch, we take seeds, we coat them in a wax, which is actually plastic. And yeah, if you think about all the baskets, containers, you name it, I just gave you a few little examples of how there is a lot of plastic in our farming. And that's a bit of a problem because as you said, when that plastic it breaks down and it gets into the soil, and then what happens to it once it gets into the soil? This is my plastic bottle there. When it gets into the soil, it moves around. There's been some research which has been done. There's probably more research that needs to be done. But you can see right now that polyethylene, that's the number ones. The plastic particles are sticky and they stick to the back of an earthworm, and the earthworm moves it around, takes it to different levels in the soil, just nicely organizes it, the plastic, in layers in the soil. Insects, again, sticky, gets all over the back of the insects, moves them around for us. It's lovely, it's really a beautiful picture, isn't it? But it gives you an idea of that this plastic gets moved around in ways that we don't think about, basically. Unfortunately, we also know that the smaller pieces of plastic, the nano plastic fibers, those are so small. Those are less than a micron in size, and those can be taken up by planes. So the image that you see on the right there is where it's being taken up into the xylem, and it's going to move through the entire plant. And some research has been done on this. So the bigger pieces, you don't get inside the plant; they just stick to the outside of the plant. But the bigger, or to the roots of the plant, I should say. But the smaller pieces can actually infiltrate into the plant and get up into it. Now, not all of it, obviously, just some of it is getting in there. And it depends on size. And that's going to be a problem. And so, what is plastic? So, when we start to think about this, we really do need to think a little bit about what is plastic actually. And it's really simple. It's just a polymer. If you've ever had organic chemistry like it's anyone? Yeah, organic. It's just a chain of hydrocarbons, carbon and hydrogens. That's really all it is. With a lot of chemicals actually adhering to it, smashing in between these long chains of hydrocarbons. That's exactly what happens. You have long chains of hydrocarbons, and then they chemically shove chemicals in between them. And those chemicals are what give plastic all those characteristics that we love, right? Making them flexible, making them flame retardant, making them impervious to sunlight, sort of impervious, they obviously still break down. UV light, you name it, heat resistant, all of those things are due to chemicals which are just shoved in between. But you'll see that they're not found there. So if we break those polymers apart, those chains, then chemicals just come out into the environment. So, chemical additives comprise up to 50% of the weight of the plastic. So it's not an insignificant amount. What are those chemicals? So there are thousands and thousands of chemicals that go into making plastic. And we don't know what most of them are. And that's because it's proprietary, right? These companies that make this plastic, they don't have to tell us what's in there. So we figured out. And we know that, a number of them are of low concern, that's great. And unfortunately, there are a number of the order of the chemicals that we know about right now that are neurotoxins, carcinogens, mutagens, and endocrine disruptors. Those are the and then almost half that we don't even know about. And it's highly unlikely at this point in time that we're going to find out much more than what we know right now. At least not here in this country. Not something that we're focusing our attention on right now. But this is a problem, right? We need to be aware of this. And as I said in the very beginning, that idea that these things, they've been in our environment for a long time. And now we're starting to see them all break down in different places. And we've been putting so much more into our environment over the last 40, 50, 60 years that we've got this compound problem going on. But we really didn't know until really recently that any of this was a problem. Now, I'm not saying that the people who made plastic didn't have an inkling that there was a problem. What I'm saying is the public didn't know. When I first started looking at this stuff 3, 4 years ago, yeah, something like that. Yeah, I would do a search for articles on plastic, and maybe 100 would come up, maybe 200. But if I search now, there's been 10,000 articles. I mean, that's how this is exploded in the last 4 years. And it's incredible the speed at which research is being done on this. All over the world. It's not just here in the United States. In fact, most of it is being done, a lot of it seems to be being done in China, of all places. But when that plastic breaks down, it breaks into smaller pieces. Those chemicals leach out of the plastic, end up in the soil. Unfortunately, some of those pieces of plastic, those little pieces that are left, are sticky, and so things stick to them. So in this example, you can see here, like, C is copper. So if there's a particle of copper in the soil, then a piece of plastic, the copper could stick to the piece of plastic. And then it moves around, stuck to that piece of plastic. So there's a lot of movement that we really didn't even think about before. And some of these chemicals are, as we said, endocrine disruptors, other things that are just not good that we want to keep away. BPA, everybody's using BPA-free bottles now. But unfortunately, that doesn't mean that we're not using bottles that are BPF or BPS or BPSH in them. But we have regulated BPA, at least in baby bottles. That's one place we've actually regulated them, is in baby bottles here in the United States. But because there was so much pressure, nobody wanted BPA, they got rid of BPA in almost all the bottles. They didn't tell us that they substituted with something that's very similar to BPA. Back to that, I suggest you don't use a plastic bottle because it probably has BPS or BPF or something else in it. And oh, I'm a bit heavy, and I'll try to work it, but the hormone disruptors, the endocrine disruptors, so hormones or chemicals that are made in one part of our body and they move around to other parts of our body. And they work at extremely low levels, at low concentrations, and they have a major effect on all the organs in our body. Just about everything is run through hormones. And so endocrine disruptors, which are hormone disruptors, they can mimic hormone, or they can block the hormone, they come in many different forms. But a lot of those chemicals that we were talking about are what we call endocrine disruptors. So they're playing around or impacting, I should say, the hormones in our bodies. And the hormones, as you can see in that image, they affect your brain, your mammillary glands, you name it, your testes, your ovaries, about everything. So this is a bit of a problem because when endocrine disruptors don't do their job, not the job we want them to do, it also leads to things like cancers and other problems of that nature. I think probably most of us know a lot of those. Has anyone ever heard of PFAS? No. Yeah. Unfortunately, that's an endocrine disruptor. So PFAS, these are what we call forever chemicals, per and polyfluoral alkyl substances. There's some of those chemicals that get matched in there. And unfortunately, what we discovered, and I use the word we, I'm talking about regulators, scientists, etc. What they found is that these chemicals are in our water system, all over the place. And now we call them forever chemicals because they don't break down in nature. They're an 8 carbon, and instead of having hydrogens on them, they have fluorides. And if anyone knows chemistry, fluoride is an extremely reactive element. And when it binds with something, boy, does it bond. It is not chemical. And so it's great. This is an amazing chemical that was made in the lab to give plastic a lot of the characteristics that it has. So if you're a chemist, you're thinking, wow, this is fantastic. And it's great because it doesn't break down and we don't have to worry about it. The problem is it doesn't break down and it's in the environment and we do have to worry about it because it is an endocrine disruptor. And we didn't think it would break down, but what we've discovered is it breaks off the plastic. So it itself doesn't break down, but it breaks out of the plastic. And it is now unfortunately, it's used a lot in the industry. And so when it's used in industry, it ends up being in the wastewater, that ends up getting to the wastewater treatment plant, it gets, so our water goes through the wastewater treatment plant, it gets treated, but they're not treating it for PFAS. Because they didn't know PFAS was a problem. And then it ends up going down into our river and our water and actually move back up through our plants and ends up back in our residential use through our food chain. So that's how we're kind of getting this PFAS. And what we've now learned is that such low concentrations of this material is really bad for us. And it builds up in us because it doesn't break down. So once we take it in, it sticks in us. And it really likes fat cells. So it really likes to be associated with fats. So it's in all your bodies. So the less you have of it, the better. So the goal is to have as little as possible. How do we do that? We try to limit the amount we take in. How do we do that here? We try at the federal level to limit the amount of PFAS allowable in water down to 4 parts per trillion. And the industry went, do that, that's too low. There's no way. We can barely even see 4 parts per trillion. It is an extremely low level. Hopefully that will hold. But right now, who knows what regulations will actually remain in place. Yeah, can you wait till the end and I don't really know that stuff, slides are up, but again, keep that to the end, okay? But that is the idea here, and that is why we're trying to have such a low level of PFAS in our water systems, and because it is the accumulation of PFAS in the body that causes the problem. So just a little bit of PFAS is probably okay, but over a lifetime, it gets to be too much. What this is really new. So up to now, I was talking about the chemicals associated with plastic. Now let's talk a little bit about the actual plastic. Those polymers that break down into smaller and smaller pieces. And the plastic itself that breaks down, the shards that you saw at the beginning, and they break down into smaller pieces. Microplastics are things that are, we can see them. They're small, but they're not that small. Nanoplastics are tiny. We're talking like virus size. We can't see them, but they're all around us. You are breathing them in as we speak right now. And we've found them in all parts of the body. They're in your liver, they're in your heart, they're in your lungs, they're in your poop, they're in your gut. And we've recently found out they're also in your brain. And so this is kind of new stuff. This was not really expected. Okay, that it would be able to get into the brain. But unfortunately, it does get into the brain. And we'll talk more about that in just a second. But with these plastics and chemicals, the periods of greatest vulnerability is, of course, with young babies. That is the period where organisms are growing, they're forming, and that is a critical period. And that is what we want to be careful about and try to protect our children as much as possible from exposure to these chemicals and to the plastics themselves. So, endocrine disruptors as well, those hormones, they don't work quite the same way. It isn't a matter of it just getting more and more and more of the hormone in your body, or the endocrine disruptor in your body, and it has a bigger and bigger and bigger effect. That's not the way that endocrine disruptors work. It might be too much, it might be too little. It's just a real balance in our bodies as to how much hormones you need. And so therefore it's not you got too much or you got too little. It's, do you have the right amount at the right time, at the right stage in your life? Basically. And we're nowhere near figuring all that out at this point. But that is one of the big issues that we have. Unfortunately, as you can see in that first picture on the left there, that is a fetus. We do know that the microplastics or the nanoplastics and the chemicals do pass through the placenta and do reach the baby. And they are found in breast milk as well, because that is a place that the body actually uses to get rid of them. Fortunately, you might be getting rid of them by giving them to your baby. But in the brain, the brain is really a protected area of the body. It has what we call a blood-brain barrier. And that is an area that, like, we didn't think much to get through that blood-brain barrier. In fact, very little can get through it. So it's a very protected area of our body. And that kind of makes sense, right? Because if our brain goes, we're done. So we do know that there are diseases in the brain. There's Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, for instance, MS. Those are all diseases that occur in the brain, because of the brain. And unfortunately, what we've just discovered in like the last couple of months, and remember I said at the beginning, things are moving super fast here. Like what happens this month is different from what happened last month. But now we know that those little tiny nanoplastics, the very, very small pieces, are getting through the blood-brain barrier. And actually, more of them are getting through the blood-brain barrier than we ever suspected. And the smaller the piece, the more that gets through. We don't know. We don't know what the effect of that is. But it is more than likely that it is causing inflammation in the brain because it's causing a reaction that produces reactive oxygen molecules. And those reactive oxygen molecules cause inflammation, essentially. And they kind of bang around in the brain and damage the cells of the brain. And that leads to things like Alzheimer's disease. But we don't have that evidence quite yet. We're close, but not quite yet. What we know now at this point is that they are getting through to the brain rats. Okay, it's and in human tissue. I just watched a webinar the other day that they had brain tissue from 2016 to 2020, and they had a number of samples. And they could see that the nanoplastics was migrating into the brain in those different samples, with more in 2020 than in 2016. So suggesting that, again, as we have more in the environment, more gets into us, unfortunately. So, what does it mean? We don't know. We're kind of running a biological experiment, and we don't really know what we're doing at this point. And, part of this is because when we started the experiment back in the 50s, we didn't know about any of this. We couldn't even see anything that was the size of a nanometer. So the reality is, yes, I think there's certainly people and businesses, etc., that were aware long before us. The public became aware of things, but at the same time, we have to say that it wasn't really known problem until recently. And we've been using plastic as if it didn't matter, without knowing what the consequences of the plastic in our environment were going to be. Kind of thought there would be no problem with it. But unfortunately, there is a problem. So, yeah, that leads us to take a breather, smile, laugh. What do you want to do? You want to go run? I feel like running a lot these days. And there's a lot to think about, right? We're not going to solve this problem overnight. It's going to take a concerted effort to solve this problem. It is not going to happen immediately. And even even if we stopped using plastic today, everybody in the world stopped using plastic today, we still have 60 years of plastic, which is degrading here on Earth. But what we can do is cut down on the amount of plastic that we're putting into the system until we figure out solutions to the problems that we have. Because we can come up with solutions, we need some time, right? So the best way to have time is to reduce the amount of plastic that we have. Why? How does this happen? Why is plastic proliferate so much? And plastic is made from fossil fuels. That's all there is to it. And originally, plastic was more difficult to make than it is now. But now it's actually just made from ethane, which is a byproduct of fracked gas. And so when we started doing fracking, we also started producing a lot more plastic. And it's cheap to make plastic. So when we think about solutions, make it more expensive, for goodness sakes, to make plastic. But we're not doing that. But that would be a solution, right? Let's make it expensive to make plastic. But plastic is made from fossil fuels. And the fossil fuel industry's had some problems lately. Up until recently, they kind of had a plan. That plan was to produce oil and gas as a fuel, as an energy source, heating, electric, you name it. And then it looked like maybe we were turning the corner and we were going to have lots of different sources of energy, wind, solar, you name it, geothermal, hydrothermal, whatever. All sorts of different solutions, and therefore oil and gas industry was actually seeing a decline. That was actually happening probably up until about 2 months ago. And at that point, their plan was, hey, look, we still wanted oil and gas. Hey, this is a big industry there. So let's use it to make more plastic. And let's use it to make single-use plastic. Because just like your oil, your fuel, you drive your car up to this crazy tank. You sit there for 6 minutes while your tank fills up. You go drive 300 miles and you come back and you fill it up again. It's a great system. Single-use plastic is exactly the same. You use it once, you throw it away, you don't think about where it goes, and guess what? You need more plastic. It's the same idea, only now we're not using liquid fuel, we're using plastic. Let's start thinking about plastic. They might have a different plan B. Okay, that plan B might be going back to plan A, because they're getting rid of all the regulations and it's drill rig. So maybe we're back to plan A, I'm not sure. But the plastic production is growing here in the United States. and it's growing a lot. This is an older slide, but North American plastic makes up approximately 19% of all the global plastic in the world. That's us. Here. So it's not elsewhere, it's here. China produces more plastic, but we're like second in line. And I really like this one. Stuff like that. And this slide shows you where there are plastic and chemical processing plants being proposed. This is since 2020. All those dots show you all the different the chemical facilities, which, by the way, you know, the American Chemical Society has done extremely well over my lifetime, because you need all these chemicals to go with the plastic, right? So, and you can see they are clustered in a lot of places, especially near water. And down at the bottom there, that's Cancer Alley down there.
Yeah.
The Gulf of America, absolutely. So I grew up in New Orleans, so for me, it's still the Gulf of Mexico. But also up there in Ohio, right? Still up there in Ohio, in that area. And you might want to think about why is it there? What? Fracking, Marcellus Shale. That's why it's there. And in fact, to give you an idea, it's right on our doorstep. This is a huge, huge plant outside Pittsburgh. And it came online in 2022, I would say. And just to give you an idea, you know, I put over there the amount the amount of chemicals they were allowed to emit into the environment. 2.2 million tons of carbon, 522 tons of volatile organic compounds each year. And I will tell you that within the first 2 months, they blew through all of those numbers and were sued, basically. Doesn't mean they have stopped by any means, but that is the other thing we have to do, is really be watchdogs to these these very, very large facilities. And I've been there. I'm driven around this place. I specifically drove to Pittsburgh to go over to see it. And those trains, down. To give you an idea of how big this thing is. So it is on our doorstep. And, you know, honestly, if the politics in New York State changed, they would be not even on our doorstep, they would be in our doorstep within very, very short period of time. And so the connection I'm making here is between plastic and environmental issues and climate change, because that's my other love in life, you know, and the plastic industry is responsible for a lot of the carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere. It's in the making of the plastic itself. So, I know. So I like to put this picture up because I just want you to take a second to think about, you know, walking down a nice. But now we think about the worms with the plastic. It's only heard that many worms this plastic, I mean, in this woods, you know. And, you know, we're going out of the fire, just to remember that our environment is something that we want to maintain and keep and take care of. not only for ourselves, but also for our kids and our grandchildren. Do you remember this? They have to be from the 70s, basically. Two things I want to point out here. So this problem is not because of anything we do. You are not responsible for the recycling issue, okay? You're told to recycle number ones, number twos, number fours, number fives, you're told to do all this. And then it's really important that you do it. But remember that number I gave you. About 5% of all plastic is actually recycled. So they're asking you to look at the little pretty piece over here, and they're saying, oh, just ignore that elephant over there, which is the 95%. Okay, we're not responsible for that, even that 5% over here. The industry that makes the plastic is responsible for that. But since the 70s, they've been trying to tell us that it is our job to recycle everything. First, they started with the chasing it. It was a piece of art, actually. That's what that started. It was a competition, just to produce something for the plastic industry. And the number that goes inside there, like the 1, the 2, that was for industry. That was for the manufacturers to know what kind of plastic it was. Nothing to do with it being recycled. Recycling things. So it does not mean that it's recyclable. Even today, we think it means it's recyclable. It doesn't. Something is recyclable if we can sell it and make money off of it. That's why sometimes paper is recyclable. Sometimes it isn't. It's why lead is recyclable and steel, etc., because we can make money off of it. That's what determines if something is recyclable or not. And the Indian, there was a great ad. Remember Pepsi? And Pepsi put out the ad. And the image was the Indian right here. He actually got out of his canoe and he stood on the side of the road, and a car comes up and the window rolls down, and you see a hand coming out of the car and dropping like a Burger King bag or something right on the ground, right in front of his feet. And a tear comes down his eye, and he said, only you, American. It's up to you. And we've been living with that ever since. It's our responsibility to take care of this mess. But we're the ones who produce this mess. So look at the little kids, you know, they'll tell you, a baby will say, oh, it's you clean it up. No. It's your responsibility to clean up. You made the mess. And that's kind of where we are. And we need to get that message out. Obviously, it was a very good contest. It worked extremely well. But the reality is we are not going to recycle ourselves out of this mess. There's too much of it. It's like using a teaspoon. And the tub is overflowing with plastic. And so whenever you hear people talking about it, and they talk about recycling first, you need to think about the preventing and the reducing and the reuse. And you need to say to somebody, well, why don't we try to prevent this amount of plastic? So anyone who's, you know, in an ad that says, oh, recycle this plastic, we use recycled plastic. You have to ask yourself, wait, we should be talking about reducing, not recycling. Reducing first. You talk to me about reducing, then you talk to me about recycling. And think of the pyramid. The pyramid that we all kind of learned. Well, my kids learned in school. I don't think I learned it on school. There are all these false solutions about how we can get rid of all our plastic. most of them down to burning. Right? They call it chemical recycling. Well, it's actually burning. And when we burn plastic, we release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That is not good in our environment. And a lot of chemicals also get released. If you have a incinerator that's got good scrubbers on it, you might collect most of that stuff. But some always gets out. Dioxins are an example of something that gets out. And if you have heard anything about burning plastic, it produces dioxins, and those are extremely toxic. And they settle down into the soil, and that's a real problem. It's a problem right now. If many of you remember the fires in California and Los Angeles, you know, I have a daughter who lives there. Thank goodness her house didn't get burned down, but guess what? She hasn't gotten back to her house yet, even though it didn't burn down, because everything is contaminated. And it's all contaminated because what burned was plastic, because our houses are plastic. And that's a real problem. So, but there are a few other things that we should talk about. So I love this. This is a bag. I came from my grocery. I kind of grew up when they started producing. We used to get, you know, our drugs and things in a paper bag. And all of a sudden they started putting in plastic bags. Like, why? Paper is great. Why are we using plastic? Well, we're using plastic. Oh, it's so much better. You know, it's recycled. 30% of this is recycled material. We're using recycled material to make this plastic. This is the truth of the matter is they aren't. They say they aren't. And the way they come up with these numbers is they put all this plastic together. Right? And in order to make new plastic, it's very energy intensive. And so in order to make new plastic, they have to create the energy in order to make the plastic. And what they do is burn plastic. And then they use that energy and they add a whole bunch of virgin plastic to make the new plastic bag. So while this is 30%, it isn't, because the vast majority of it went up in smoke, and they had to add virgin clean plastic in order to make this bag. So it's a game of numbers, basically. And that's really important because you see it everywhere. You know, we're using recycled plastic. Recycled plastic is the answer. It isn't, because plastic has got so many chemicals in it that you can't just put it all together and put it in a big vat and think you're gonna come out with something that doesn't look like black yogurt. You know, and you need to have those characteristics in the right concentration in order to get the characteristic that you are looking for in your plastic. You can't just stick with the stuff and put it together. It's insane to think that you can do that. You can't. And they aren't. They're just working. And then they're adding virgin plastic, which by the way comes from the gas industry. In order to make them. Remember that first slide I showed you in the very beginning, how much plastic, most of it is virgin plastic. That's the reason why. So the idea of using recyclable plastic is just carrying on that idea that we'll just put in new plastic and throw it away and put in new plastic again. So the really answer to plastic pollution is to stop making plastic. So, and we know 42% of it is packaging. We can come with better solutions. So there's a lot we can do without paying to reduce the amount of plastic. And then you start to get into tough stuff like PVC. You know, Judith would love to get rid of PVC. PVC pipe. It would be really nice to get rid of PVC pipe because PVC is awful, right? But we're not. I mean, not anytime soon. My attitude is let's deal with the stuff that we can deal with. We can deal with the same as possible. So. We also, in order to kind of do that, we have to think outside the box. We have to think about a new way of doing things. Okay? In the 50s, plastic was handed to us. It really was. It was the answer to everything. There were ads everywhere. Oh, you're not anything anymore. You just use plastic and throw it away. It's great. That was the attitude. Okay. But what? We always thought about using things. We didn't throw them away. We need to kind of rethink ourselves back to that idea. And this is an example. This is a small company that started that I heard about. I just went across the backside of the slide. And basically it is, you can imagine like a Home Depot or some other kind of construction site or something, and they've got this kiosk back there. And basically the kiosk spits out a metal bottle, and the person takes the metal bottle, they choose from out there what flavor or drink they want. They put it in, the spigot works, so out comes the drink, they get a top for it, they drink it, and then they bring the bottle back, and there's a place where you just put the bottle in. That little machine, but somewhere in the back there, it cleans and sterilizes the bottles, and then they just get brought back out again. They're, and, so you don't need to bring bottles, so you don't need to transport them. The only thing you're transporting is the concentrate for the drinks themselves. And obviously there's gotta be water somewhere, it's gotta be hooked up to water. But you can see how that's the idea of a circular economy. The idea that we can design new ways of doing things that uses less of our resources. And this is just a simple example. But we need to think that way about everything. And that's going to be beneficial to everyone. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican, independent, whoever. I'm people who doesn't want to reduce our need for our natural resources. So this is a win-win for everyone. It creates jobs and ideas, you know, you name it. The other thing we can do is legislation. Here in New York, right now, we have a bill, the New York State Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act, which, beyond plastic, and leave the voters, is in favor of seeing passed. I was lucky enough to be in Albany last year when this bill passed in the Senate at about 9 o'clock at night, sitting next to Judith Day. It was quite the moment. Unfortunately, it was on the very, very last day of the legislative session, which is a 2-year session. And it was 10 o'clock at night. And the decision was made not to bring it to the assembly for a vote. One of the things that I didn't know, is bring a bill to the assembly for a vote. And they use all of the data for. So if you bring something in at 10 o'clock at night, you're gonna be there till 2 o'clock in the morning. And the decision is made. Like one bill, and this was not. So the bill did not get passed, it's up again. I believe your assembly member is. You have a few, all right. I don't know who your assembly members are, but you can make sure that they are in favor of the bill. Yeah, and yeah, as well as your senators. What? What?
To this go,
To
you know.
this, yeah, this is probably, so, but this is the bill, the idea behind this bill is not only that we would reduce the amount of plastic in packaging, which is what the basic bill is. We would have to make all packaging recyclable, 70% recyclable over a 12-year period, so this is not like tomorrow. This is a phased-in project. But more importantly, it would establish a system, or I think more importantly, establish a system to develop or reuse, refill projects, to inform the public, change the way we do things, which is what we really need to do. So our bill is, if it passes, will be considered the premier bill in the country. California was before us, but their bill will be weaker than our bill, assuming we get it through again. And hopefully this year we will. We will see, but that's the idea. And we have to join forces. Just like the educational and world is learned, you gotta join forces, right? Right now, Columbia went out on its own and had to make a deal. Whereas Harvard and now lots and lots of other universities are working together and making deals. So is how we can get a lot more done if we join forces. And that is an area I would say, again, the league, for instance, all of our leagues, we've got 41 leagues in New York State. All 41 of us could be working, just each league could be working on a project together to make sure that we get the New York State packaging reduction and recycling infrastructure out of the house. And by going back to our own communities and doing it, right? Not just going to Albany and doing it, but going back to our own community. Because the reality is we need to educate our own people at the local level. Because a bill or a law is a law, but if the public doesn't want it, it doesn't get, it doesn't matter if it's a law. It doesn't get enforced, it gets fought, you name it. So we really need to educate our own communities. And I put forth the challenge to the leagues. I'm very happy to go to 41 leagues and talk to every single one of them about this. Well, 39. I've been there. And take action. Community, there's tons and tons of things that you can do. And you just have to be, you can join the mailing list, you can become more knowledgeable, you can take a course with two things beyond plastic. I put this one up, this one just ended, so I just decided to leave it up there. There is not doing it right now, but it gives you an idea. You know, these are the types of things that you can do. And we start here, local. It's really important that we start at a local level and work upwards, just like the league does. The league is a from the ground up organization. That is the most power that we have. And with that, I will apologize, not to be, but it is the solver. So now I'm happy to take any questions. I don't even know from you. Oh, okay, cool. Yeah.
When you freeze things in plastic, the other day, as I opened my freezer and, you know, frozen vegetables or whatever, I have, how does that work for leaching into the food?
Freezing is not as bad. Heating plastic is very bad because as you heat it up, you are actually breaking it down. Okay, as to how much leaches out of that plastic, who knows exactly, but it's just not good. So like, but we all grow. It is, so, you know, as you learn more, you stop doing it, you go, oh, I can't. Freezing is not as much of a problem. I freeze things in plastic, I'll be honest. But I take them out of plastic before they defrost as much as I possibly can. And plastic and fatty things, you really want to keep those two separate from each other because the chemicals in plastic really like lipids, they like fatty things. So it is really good to be conscious of that idea of not wanting to put fatty things near to your plastic. And yes, I do suggest you change out your Tupperware, your glass containers and all that kind of stuff. It really just reduces and makes you think a little bit more about plastic. Yeah.
So we had talked about this earlier. So now what do I do with that stuff?
What do you do with the glass?
Plastic, I'm not gonna get rid of it and I'm gonna replace it with glass. So that presents, to me, that presents like another problem because now I'm putting plastic into the trash or the recycle.
Yes, I would throw it away. I'll be honest with you, I would just throw it away.
Yeah, I just put it in my attic and just leave it out there.
Yeah, you have to think long term, by getting rid of your plastic and throwing it away once, you're not throwing it away 10 times.
Yeah, but we get all of our yolk, our sour cream, everything.
It's really hard,
That's the hard. Yeah.
it is very hard.
Plastic pretty much in the grocery store, because you can't find, baked goods in boxes. And I went back to when I was a kid, everybody, we used condensed, concentrated orange juice.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I went back to it, no, they have it. I went back to it a year or two ago, and my daughter's using it. It's like otherwise, most orange juice is in plastic.
Yeah.
It's hard to find it in a carton, and that's plastic coated. So I went back to that, and, you know, I'm telling people, everybody, do it, it's so easy. Just, you know.
It's not easy. It's not easy.
It is easy, you just add water to it.
Oh, well, yes. Remember when we used to get it, the frozen thing? I grew up with this.
That's what I do, I use glass and mix it myself. And most of it in the stores, it's not from concentrate, it's from concentrate. So they're adding the water.
Yeah.
I'm not saving much money, but I'm not using plastic.
And you
But
see,
the hardest thing, getting back to what Barbara said, is the, you know, I don't find little things as yogurt, like a big yogurt.
Yeah.
You know, that's.
There's nothing.
well, there are glass containers to do it now.
Both of them.
Yeah, there's some glass containers, and you know, they're more expensive, fancy, but on the other hand, if we start buying them, the grocery store will produce more of them, because we are actually going for them, you know, so. That is one thing, and you can go to your grocery store and say, look, I want some mayonnaise, and I don't want it in plastic. There are glass jars, you need to have glass jars here. And if enough people speak up, you'll get glass jars back. But it is very frustrating. Absolutely very frustrating. Yeah.
So what is Saratoga County doing with all the plastic that I rinse out and use water to clean, put it in the second?
So 1s, 2s, and 4s are usually small. So those are polyethylene plastic, and they're cleaner, okay? Because those can be separated out. And those will be reused in some way, shape, or form. They might slice them up into small pieces and make them into that furniture that you see, or clean it up. Yeah. Or they might melt it down a little bit and form it into something different. Okay, so 1s, 2s, and 4s usually are sold. Okay, Sixes, sevens, they probably put it in landfill and they burn it. It depends where you are. In Portland County, we have a landfill, Onondaga County has incinerator. And it makes a big difference. I mean, in Portland County, because we have a landfill and we are terrified about ourselves, our landfill cells filling up much quicker than they anticipated. We're 14 years ahead of schedule on our latest cell. And it costs $1.8 million to cover that cell. This is not junk money here, not for our county of 50,000 people, right? So what do? When I present to them a memorandum of support for the New York State Packaging Reduction and Recycling Act, which by the way, I live in a very Republican area. You think all about it. They passed that resolution of support unanimously. Even more things than I don't stand up as a legal women voter person and say, you know, you really should do this. Then some of our stubborn is we won't vote for it. But if I listen to quiet, they don't vote for it because they know that it is beneficial to lower the amount of plastic that comes into those landfills. I'm now become a bigger, better population for the same reason. So, you know, that's what I'm also saying that the league can do. It can go to every one of these art areas and ask our legislators to do a memorandum of support. And that is even more powerful than you and I calling up and saying, support this. When our county says support it, they listen. It's important.
Your talk is amazing, it's everything in perspective, but I really appreciate what you said about the consumer, like we're all here, we're trying to use all the glass we possibly can, right? Really try so hard to reduce, but the big guys out there, the chemical and petroleum industries are getting away with murder. And one thing I really want to address is the Superfund law that has been completely ignored. No one talks about it. We have a Superfund in Saratoga Springs. It is the tax on the chemical companies has been eliminated because it expired. And nobody's talking about that. But you're talking about all the money they're making and all the product they're producing, and we get to pay for cleaning it up. And I think it's outrageous, and I am really want to bring that to the attention of the public and educate people about Superfund.
Yeah, absolutely. I had not thought about that side of it, but you're absolutely correct. 100%. And I will tell you also that I tried to get memorandum of support through Onondaga County. They won't even talk to them because they incinerate plastic and they won't really off of it. So these are the kinds of things that I do think that the public could learn a lot from. And it's not a matter of they don't want to know, it's that we've reached a point where the public is not informed anymore. For one reason or another, and I don't know exactly how to solve that. We have it's both paid, and I put as much as I can. We got 239 followers. You know, it's taken me a year to get to 239 followers. So super excited about my 239 followers. So I need young people to help me. You know, I need people who know what the heck they're doing to get out there and give the information to a group that will be the mover and shaker for the future. And I say that because I don't write children and I goddamn well don't want my children. That's really the truth. Yeah.
What do you think about metal as an alternative for packaging? The things that are liquids, for example, bottles, replacing my water bottle.
Aluminum is probably the best solution, you know, in
100% recyclable aluminum.
yeah, exactly. No, nothing, aluminum is stable, there's nothing that comes out of aluminum. And steel, I mean, we recycle something like 80% of our steel. We really do a fantastic job, and we recycle paper. 70% of the paper gets recycled. All right, so it's not like we can't recycle. The issue is we don't want to recycle plastic. There's too many different kinds. You can't recycle plastic. It's a myth. And at least not produce anything that's anywhere near. Yeah,
The reason I know about aluminum is a couple of years ago, Jason Momoa, the actor,
yeah.
he did some fantastic, public service announcements about how, it was great, about how aluminum is the only 100% recyclable material, and that we should be using it. But I don't know what happened to them. It was short-lived, and it educated me, and it would educate young people because it's Jason Momoa. You know, and it would educate them because he was shirtless doing that. Yeah, we need to get those out there again.
Yeah, we need to do all of that. It does become a little bit of a whack-a-mole, what's the most important thing to deal with. Right at the moment, I'll be honest with you, it kind of feels like it's been years since January 20th. I gave a talk on January 5th, and I come back to that. It's one of two words basically to think about. Wow, the world is really different from January 5th than it is today. And I'm not positive that we can put as much energy into plastic or dealing with it right this instant. We might have other things that we have to deal with first. And that might be bigger things like democracy and our rule of law and our separation of power and our regulations. You know, that might be one of the more important things that we have to deal with. The plastic is a problem and it's an issue, but it may not be where we need to put all of our energies right this instant. At the same time, little bit of energy, we can get across New York State. The league has got 41 different leagues. We probably hit almost all of the counties, or in some way. And we could get all the counties to sign a memorandum of support for the New York State Packaging Reduction Recycling Infrastructure Act. That would be a big thing. You know, is bill gonna pass? Who knows? But at least the league would be doing something, and we could do it. We could do it, and it wouldn't take that much, right? Memorandum is easy to get. I mean, that's just, it's an email, saying like that, basically. But, you know, then it's just asking them if they'll sign it. And that kind of thing. So little things like that, I think we can do. We may not be able to do the huge big things, but little things lead to big things.
Been seeing ads that show the soft drink companies talking about a new form of recycling that is so much better, which I consider probably bullshit, but I just am not wasting a lot of time looking at those. But I was just wondering if there's anything to what they're proposing. Is it working on the ones, twos, and fours?
Yes, it's working on the ones.
They're getting rid of caps. That's one of the things that, which I of course know they're not ones, twos.
Right, you have to get rid of the tax. Yeah, so when they talk about recycling the material to make this, or to make this, or to make this, or to make this, guess what? They're talking about the same ones, twos, fours. Because those are the only ones that they can do something with. So everybody is fighting to have the same ones, twos, and fours. So no, they're not increasing the amount of recycling. They're just recycling the 1, 2, and 4s, and they're all fighting over who gets those 1, 2, and 4s. Which is the unfortunate part. Yeah. Yeah.
Other plastics in clothing, you know, you see all this stuff that's recycled and all of a lot of letterware and outdoor wear, it's 30% recycled, is that plastic?
Yeah. It is. I'm sorry to say. It's plastic in here. There's plastic in these pants. There's plastic No, this is. The LLT, it stretches out to it, probably it's just cotton. But my underwear's probably plastic, not, it's plastic. And unfortunately, things like wax, you think wax is good, right? Like, not beeswax is beeswax, but wax, like on the inside of a paper container, to make sure, like your pizza thing, you know, to make sure that the oil doesn't, yeah, that's just plastic. Milk cartons is plastic.
No, but I mean, they make the people.
But they have plastic on the inside.
They're paper lined.
And it's, if you really like to blow your mind. Cans, like soup cans. Like, cans, tomato soup. There's a plastic one in there, so I've seen it. Where? And there has been since the fifties.
Yes.
Because of the.
Because you taste the metal on those. Yeah. There's a science experiment you can do to show that the plastic is in there. Yeah. Removing the can and getting out of it, it's the plastic. So yeah, there's plastic and things we didn't even realize. I mean, and I started all this myself, just like you all. I started with like, I got ones, I got twos, and I'm gonna separate this stuff. Damn it, I'm just gonna go look it up and that was the beginning of my trip. In fact, it was worse than that, because I'm a scientist, so I became interested, about this part, I became interested in finding out how much plastic I actually use. So for a whole, like 3 months, every day, I would weigh my little plastic waste, and I kept a little record of it. And I was just positive. I never did anything with it, but it's just like, oh, how much plastic am I using? I don't know, but yeah, that's how I became aware, I mean, whoa, there's a lot of plastic.
I occasionally shop at like Ron's Way Food Co-op in Albany, and they do a tremendous amount of stuff involved. And you can take your own container and you can fill up your shampoo now with a big plastic, shampoo.
Yeah.
Fill up your own shampoo. And my daughter is so anti-plastic, it's actually very annoying. So when I buy her bar shampoo, you know,
I have a bar
some
shampoo.
plastic containers and we have to get, recycle the dental floss that doesn't have an plastic thing that you can refill. And, you know, all of this stuff, and it gets, you can do it, it is difficult.
It's expensive and it's difficult. I mean, it's out of the reach of a lot of people, and that's really disturbing. But I will tell you, yes, a year and a half ago, I was out in California for 6 weeks because my youngest grandchild was born, and I was out there helping out, for 6 weeks, and, it's starting on bottles. And they're using plastic bottles. And I actually ordered glass bottles and just had them delivered. Obviously, because no, it's like, Mom, what are you doing? Well, I couldn't handle it anymore.
So, is there a continuum of like the worst and the best? I mean, it seems like plastic water bottles would be the easiest thing to never use again. I really don't use very many of them, but and I'm not, maybe that's Tupperware, I use a lot of Ziploc bags, you know, so is there a continuum of like, these would be at the top priority to get rid of, and then this and this, like, is there the worst, the best? Not the best, but.
I don't have anything like that. I would say keep plastic away from food as much as possible, and certainly fatty stuff away from plastic. So, you know, if you have, even if you have a glass container with a plastic top, as long as food doesn't get near the plastic, it's not a big deal. And freezing things in plastic, I bring bagels home and I put them in plastic bags and I throw them in the freezer, they're gonna be frozen. and I take them out before I use them. So I try very hard that way, but I don't know. There is a continuum in the sense of, yeah, Wakeman sells, like a chicken that's in a plastic bag that you can cook in the aluminum oven, you stick the whole thing in it. I know, I've eaten them because I didn't know when I. You know this isn't oven safe? No. No. So we as consumers say no to these things. Olive oil, you can buy it in plastic or you can buy it in glass. Buy it in glass. So let your fingers or your wallet do some of the talking for you.
So I think we're looking about, one more question to this.
I know it's a very such as very recent, but
Yes.
I want to know if you know some specific effects on fetuses, malaria, and children.
The answer is, the question was, do I know anything about specific effects on infants and fetuses and young children? And the answer is no, we do not have that information, and it's really, really hard to come by on humans, because that is against our rules to do a babies, okay? But we do know in rats, for instance, we can do research there, and their reproductive organs get messed up. They have ADHD issues. Those types of things have been identified. And right now that's kind of working. So we're really at the point of not knowing very much. We know that like these particles get into the brain and we think that they cause inflammation, because in the heart, we do know they cause inflammation. And they're definitely associated with cardiovascular problems. But that is, again, because they produce reactive oxygen, particles that cause inflammation. And so, yeah, the answer is no.
Look how long we've known about lead and what lead does to children. And we are still just beginning to replace lead water.
Okay. So we're gonna
We're
wait
talking about that, so many decades. And we are just starting.
yes, and the problem is we're replacing PVC.
Yeah.
So. In 100% agree, guy, I think it's insane to me that it's taking so long. But we're gonna replace it with PVC, because that's cheap. Well, thank you.
I want to bring something home with you and take it home. And take it with you. And then you're not taking your plastic, styrofoam, and get a plastic bag maybe, when I'm in New York.
And then you go to the out place, tell them you don't want the silverware. You don't need a plastic if you're going home. Tell them no. And in fact, that's one of our projects that people can do in the community, is get the entire community to decide that all of the restaurants will not offer takeout silver or, you know, plastic, unless they specifically ask. And you know, that's an easy one, because restaurants, they save money by not having to about plastic. Yeah,
And there is that, Dr. Cameron's very generously brought a lot of information on that on the table. Feel free to pick it up.
yes.
It was a light week.
And there's no Matt Simon, there's no poison like plastic, yeah, poison like no other. Great book, easy to read, fun. Exactly, thank you all.
Thank you.